collaborates with EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, and CDC, the Center for Disease Control, who has approved the disinfectants to kill COVID-19 and several other viruses that pose epidemic and pandemic threats. Deep clean your facilities once every quarter. Wash drapes, chairs, and carpeting. Disinfect and sanitize your facilities daily. In the high-touch areas where you serve the customers, it should be done every 15 minutes from start to close. Use color-coded gloves and cleaning cloths to differentiate cleaning of restrooms, kitchenettes, and general office reception areas to avoid cross-contamination or spread the virus from one area to another. It is important to wear personal protective equipment, which we call PPE. They should be worn at all times, for example, masks and gloves during all cleaning tasks. All disposable PPE should be thrown after use. Use Environmental Protection Agency recommended disinfection for cleaning to avoid the spread of COVID-19 and other related viruses and bacteria. Especially for the human coronavirus, the cleaning solutions should all contain quaternary ammonium. Quaternary ammonium compounds are potent disinfectant chemicals commonly found in disinfectant wipes, sprays, and other domestic or commercial cleaners that are specifically designed to kill germs. It is often the active ingredient that allows a product to claim to be antibacterial or virucidal, and as a result, are certified by the United States Environmental Protection Agency, EPA. The list of approved cleaning solutions for killing viruses and bacteria, especially COVID-19, can be found on the EPA website. For further information, call Lewis Industries Limited at 450-4060.
This time check is brought to you by Massey Stores Home, your way to a beautiful home in the Gablewood Shopping Mall.
Welcome. This is Choice News Now, live at midday. I'm Janika Simon with you until 2 o'clock this afternoon. Happy Friday, everybody. We have made it to the end of the week. Give yourselves a little pat on the back for that. Now, I do have a fascinating discussion ahead of us today. I have two candidates from the People's Progressive Party Civic, a party that people are now describing as the government in waiting in Guyana after the Caribbean Court of Justice handed down a momentous decision in the appeal case relating to elections of March the 2nd. And we will be talking to them in a minute. But before we get to that, I just wanted to go quickly over some developments happening in the region. Now, new reporting out of Antigua I wanted to mention is that regional carrier Liat was apparently selling tickets on its website up until the month of May, collecting $11 million, even though the airline stopped flying 2 months prior. Now, if you look on my screen right now, you can see this article from 268 Today. You can see the headline there, and it's very, very short. It says that the figure was revealed on Thursday by the chairman of Liat shareholders, Prime Minister Dr. Ralph Gonsalves, as he was giving a breakdown of the airline's debts. Developments in Liat. Let's just stay on screen, because if I go to a new tab, let's stay on screen with me. The actual website for Liat is taken offline. If you type in liat.com, you're going to get this message. Our online booking site is currently experiencing heavy traffic. Please try again later. If you try to go to liat.com, you get that same message popping up. So yeah, it looks like the liquidation is happening for Liat, and we are standing by to learn what is to happen with that $11 million in unclaimed tickets. These are people who are ticket holders, people who bought tickets this year, and who are stuck with useless tickets because obviously the planes are not going to get back off of the ground, at least under the Liat brand. Now, whether the company is going to be spun back up in a new iteration of Liat, we don't know. This is obviously what the Prime Minister of Antigua, Gaston Brown, would like to see. However, Prime Minister Gonzalez has already been talking about other airlines in the region which are standing by to pick up the routes that have been left behind by Liat's collapse. So it seems like there is some dissension among shareholder governments as to what is going to become of our regional air connectivity, and there actually is developing a little war of words between the prime ministers of Antigua and Barbuda and St. Vincent and the Grenadines. We'll do some more reporting on that next week because I want to make sure that I have plenty of time for our discussion today. So the next thing that I wanted to quickly just get into is that it seems there might just be some innate protection for those of us in the region against the COVID-19 virus. Now, I had reported recently, or not so recently, some months ago, that there was a question among scientists about whether our BCG vaccine, and that is one of the vaccines that we have, that we receive in early childhood. If you have that scar on your left shoulder, that's that BCG vaccine. It's deployed against tuberculosis. There was some thought that that vaccine would actually have a preventative measure against developing serious complications from COVID-19. Some preliminary research that is coming out just a few days ago seems to indicate that that is indeed the case. I just came across this study a short while ago, so I will be delving into that over the weekend and reporting out those findings early next week, so you definitely want to pay attention to that. But I just wanted to just quickly go through these 2 points because those are things that we need to keep an eye on. However, the main event is here, and this is my discussion today with Mr. Sanjeev Datadin, attorney at law, and Hugh Todd, assistant dean at the University of Guyana School of Business. Both of these gentlemen are candidates for the People's Progressive Party Civic in Guyana. Welcome to you both. Good afternoon, gentlemen. Happy Friday to you.
Happy Friday and good afternoon. Good afternoon, Lucia.
All right. So I see the smiles.
Good afternoon, Janica. Good
I
afternoon
see the smiles on your faces, gentlemen. Just tell me, yes, just tell me, you know, how you guys are feeling today after a very long, drawn-out process. It's more than March, April, May, June, July. 4 months have elapsed since the general election in Guyana, and it looks like we may finally be at the point where we are declaring a winner in that election. People are expecting the results to come out that would ensure a PPPC victory. But is there anything, and let me just pose that to you, Mr. Datadin, because you are an attorney, is there anything that would preclude that foregone conclusion this afternoon?
Good afternoon again, Janica. Thank you for having us, and it's my pleasure to be here. Now, the process that remains is very simple. There is only one issue that remains. A declaration needs to take place, and following that declaration, the swearing in of the president. Now, the process has gone through, as you said, over the period of 4 months. Many iterations, many obstacles, and many events have intervened. But we're at a very simple process now. The simple process that we have right now is that we are going to be faced with a situation where Mr. Lowenfield, who is the chief elections officer, has to do his job. And if he's to do his job, we're going to be just fine. He has to present a report to the commission as to what are the votes. Now, the whole country knows what these votes are. The whole world knows what these votes are. It was a public recount. It was done on radio, on television. It was live streamed across the world. So everybody knows what these figures are, and it's a matter for that to be declared by the Elections Commission in Guyana and for the swearing in of Dr. Ali to take place.
Now, if we can just quickly go to my screen, I do have a copy of the letter that was sent by Justice Singh, the chairperson of GCOM. This is dated the 9th of July. It's addressed to Mr. Lowenfield, and it talks to him about what he needs to do. And in this letter, it says by 2 p.m. on the 10th of July, that's today, so just as we're getting off air today, he is expected to submit a report using the valid votes counted in the national recount. Now, that use of that phrase, valid votes, I think is triggering to many of us, both in Guyana as well as elsewhere in the region. Now, given the Now, I understand that the CCJ has ruled, okay? So let me just set that aside for a quick minute. But given Mr. Lowenfield's actions after receiving the Court of Appeals ruling, where they said more votes means more valid votes, and given that he somehow determined via a process not yet known to anybody, that 115,000 votes in the mix were indeed not valid. Is there in the newest GCOM instruction any room for Mr. Lowenfield to exercise any discretion over which votes he thinks are valid and not?
Jenica, if I could just take a first try at responding to your question. If we understand that as a matter of law everywhere in the world, all votes are valid unless there is a reason for them to be invalid. And most countries like Guyana have legislation that specifically provides for when a vote is invalid. It's when the intention, in simple terms, it might be when the intention of the voter is not clear, meaning they have not placed an X in a box, they have put an X in every box, they have done something along those lines. Or in Guyana, if the ballot itself is not a ballot issued by the Elections Commission. Now, the ballots in Guyana have security features akin to what you would see on money, and they are checked, and if they don't have it, then those are not, that would not be a valid ballot in accordance with law. Every other ballot is valid. But if we take it to the point where writing the word valid in that letter is causing anxiety, it should not. The chief elections officer is well aware that the Caribbean Court of Justice ruling was that the Guyana Court of Appeal wrongly inserted the word valid votes into Article 177 of our Constitution. And that was taken wrongly and unlawfully by Mr. Lowenfield, the chief elections officer, as an invitation to conduct an assessment about what was valid and what was not. And the court said that was wrong, that the issue of validity has already been determined when they were counted. And when the ballots were counted, and again at a recount, those counting agents and those officers from the Elections Commission that were there in front of all the scrutineers and the party observers and do that count, they made that determination already. And the only way that that is now can change, that can now change, is if it goes before a judge in an elections petition. So Mr. Lowenfield and GCOM and no other individual agency or body has any say going forward on validity. And the court was very clear about that. It is now a matter for a court and a judge, and they ought to, the party that is alleging that there is something wrong ought to produce their evidence, and that would be the government in this case.
Right.
So there is no discrepancy or there is no reason for anxiety at all by the use of the word valid votes.
Okay. So, Mr. Todd, let me go to you today. I am wondering now, in terms of your team, everybody at the PPPC, what is the feeling like at this point in time? I know that you're now expecting that the report would validate a victory, that a declaration would be made, giving your party the reins of power in the country. And how is the PPPC feeling at this point in time? What is the forward outlook for the first few, days, weeks in office?
Well, thank you again, Janika, for having us on your program. First of all, I must say that we've had very excellent leadership from the General Secretary, Dr. Barra Jalgio, and our President-elect, along with the executive and all of the members within the PPPC. And because of that outstanding leadership, we were able to remain very collective, calm, and with good grounding in this long and protracted process. You have to understand that there's a context to all of this. We in the PPPC, we understand the nature of the APNU-AFC. And while we refer to them as the APNU-AFC, if you drill a bit deeper, you're really dealing with a PNC dominated incumbent. And if we go back historically to the nature of the PNC, what we're seeing unfolding throughout this process is really the underbelly of the dictatorship or dictatorial nature of the PNC, where they will just grab power and then try to hold on to it at all costs, having no regard for the process, the people, and the continuity of a nation. But I must say that we have continued to be strong. We're only human, so sometimes it obviously was tiring. But we honestly fighting for a bigger cause. We're not only fighting for those who are alive, but we're also fighting for those who are not even born as yet. This is a big cause, and it's actually a critical juncture in our political history, where we are now fighting to get back to that point that we achieved electoral democracy in 1992. So looking back now, we understand how important it is for us to ensure that democracy remains alive and well in Guyana, not only at the electoral process, but in all of the institutions. And we would have seen what the Granger administration would have done in democratic institutions. Look what happened in GCOM following the March 2nd elections. Look what happened in Judiciary. All of these events are part and parcel of the influence of the executive. And we knew that that fight would have been forthcoming, and that is why we were prepared at the level of our leadership. And that is why we are comfortable, and that is why we're in a good position that we are today, having brought everyone on board, understanding what democracy means and why it is important to ensure that you continue to fight for it. So now, if we go to
let's stick a pin in that, because I do want to talk about your forward outlook, but let's just stick a pin in that for a minute and let us discuss GCOM, because at the report of the observer mission, that the mission, the CARICOM mission that supervised the recount, in the executive summary, the conclusion of that summary, they did make a recommendation that GCOM be subject to a complete political audit. Now, I don't necessarily understand what they meant by that. So what do you understand of the phrase a complete political audit of GCOM. What does that mean to you? Do you think that is indeed necessary? And is that something that is a priority for a PPPC government?
Well, if you look at the...
Okay, so let's take Mr. Todd and then Mr. Datadin.
Surely.
My understanding, if you look at the configuration of the commission itself, you have 3 commissioners representing the incumbent of the day, and then you have 3 commissioners representing the opposition of the day. And I believe they were alluding to the fact that if you have a commission comprised of 6 individuals, 3 on either side, and a GCOM chair, you can have some bottlenecks, and you can have issues coming out if you have matters that are pressing, and what they would have seen with the government representatives on the commission of seeing the process in terms of being very tight, using a lot of delaying tactics. They felt that, in my view, that maybe we may need to broaden it a bit to include other persons involved so that we can have a more seamless process. That is how I understand it. And if you look at the hiring system, I don't want to go that far. We have a lot of work to do in terms of how we actually manage our human resource arm of GCOM. Go ahead, Sanjeev.
Yeah, Jenica, basically, if we look back a little bit, we used to have a different setup for GCOM, the Elections Commission. But in 1992, when it is accepted that that's when Guyana returned to a democratic process, it was agreed more as a temporary thing that 3 members of government and 3 members of the opposition would sit on the commission with a 7th person that is appointed by whoever is the president upon given from 6 names that are given to him by the opposition leader. So you would have a 7-man commission, which would be 3 government, 3 opposition, and 1 independent person. That is, in fact, still what remains, and we really should have done some changes to that. But essentially what happened on this particular occasion is the opposition leader, Dr. Bar Jagdeo, gave 6 names to the president. He refused to appoint any of those 6. 6 more names were given, he refused, and a further 6 were given. So 18 names were given, and there was no, the president kept refusing to choose one. He then went and unilaterally appointed his own person to be the chairman of GCOM. That birthed a case that went all the way to the Caribbean Court of Justice, and they, of course, declared that he had no power to do so, and the appointment was in fact unlawful. What the CARICOM, I understand the CARICOM team that were here is saying, is we have to be able to move away from the process where it is so strictly political that persons who are sitting on the commission are making decisions that are not in the interest of fairness, transparency, and the conduct of an election. And that was brought about because what happened on this occasion is when there was a unilaterally appointed chairman, every decision was voted upon and it was 4-3.
4-3.
Because there were now 4 people from the government there. They, in fact, embarked upon a process of the hiring of staff and the hiring of personnel across the Electoral Commission, which were favorable or which they perceived to be favorable to themselves. That was never what should have happened, and that was never what was envisaged that should be possible in a modern democracy. But that's what happened, and that's partially the reason for why we have the difficulties we did. The returning officer for Region 4 was Mr. Mingo, who declared unilaterally came up with numbers which were fantasy numbers. In the recount, they were proven to be fraudulent. They have no bearing in reality. We then had Mr. Lowenfield, who declared a result where he abandoned He simply discarded 115,000 of the votes of my countrymen. He did not say why he did that or from where he did that or on what authority he did that. And the Caribbean Court of Justice did comment on it to say that it was a seemingly arbitrary and transparent and without lawful authority exercise of a discretion that did not exist in the chief elections officer when he simply removed the 115,000 voters and said he would discard that and declared a result in the absence of that. And the court quite rightly said that that could not be done. There was no mechanism for that to be done. But those are the reasons why I believe that the CARICOM team made reference that we can't continue to appoint persons to the commission in the way that it is being done. And we certainly need to have a different view about the hiring of the staff in the secretariat. So there are two parts of the commission. There is the appointed 7-member commission, and then there is like the secretariat. So the commission essentially operates as if they were a board of the company. So what they are recommending is that we can't continue that way.
Understood. What I want to talk about right now is the divisions that seem to run so deeply in Guyanese society, the partisan divisions. And I mean, how does an incumbent government or an incoming government heal that or try make sure that everybody is on the same page when it comes to national development, etc. But before we jump into that discussion, we need to take a break because I don't want us to be interrupted. So this is a great time for us to take a pause right now. We'll have some commercial messages, and when we come back, we'll talk about Guyanese society and how do you navigate the partisan divide that exists there. So please stay with us. Choice News Now, live at midday. We'll be right back.
Prepare for the hurricane season by ensuring trees and other objects on your property won't get tangled in overhead wires. Be careful. Ensure ladders and tools don't come within 10 feet of power lines. If a tree is near electrical lines, don't try to trim it yourself. Contact Lucia at 452-2165 or 454-6617. Be smart. Stay safe.
We are the bank of solution for every solution, building our future today. We are the bank of solution for every solution, with you every step of the way. Always there for you, serving you and me. The solution way, we like family. Always there for you, helping you and me. We are the bank of St. Lucia for every solution. Bank of St. Lucia, all the bank you need.
Like every other business person, I was worried when the pandemic started. My sales dropped by 70%. No school, curfew and social distancing meant less gas and tires. And that's my core business. I didn't lay off my staff, and I still had all my expenses to cover. Before my struggles really started, the general manager of my credit union came to see me. He offered me a line of credit, which allowed me to stock up and stay afloat even during this difficult time. I had been dealing with traditional banks for a long time, but making that move to the Library Credit Union was the best business decision I ever made. It's about people helping people, because they're not a bank, they're better.
Welcome back. This is Choice News Now, live at midday. I'm Janika Simon, and with me today, up until 2 o'clock, are two members of Guyana's People's Progressive Party Civic. You guys have really long names for your political parties. So joining me is Mr. Todd and Mr. Datadin, both candidates for PPPC. And we have been, today is just going to be a chat about the political situation currently as it exists in Guyana. Now, as I was telling you before we actually started on the program, I was quite surprised because since the no confidence motion in late 2018, that was the first time that my news desk really started looking at what was going on in Guyana and following the twists and turns along the way. Something that really stood out to us at the Choice News Desk was the incredibly partisan nature of the discussion, the public discussion. So everybody that was speaking was either connected to one party or the other. We noted that even press, the media in Guyana is, very, very much, we're supporting PPPC or we're supporting, APNU-AFC. And I am just wondering, for a party coming into office, is this something that you are thinking about? Is this something that you are developing strategies around, outreach to maybe supporters of the opponents, just so that you can have the smoothest transition into government and really start rolling out your policy prescriptions without that huge, resistance based on partisan lines? How are you planning on navigating that?
Well, Janika, you see, in any modern democracy, for you to create prosperity and wealth and to improve the lives and the livelihood of the citizens, you have to have a healthy political system. Unfortunately for Guyana, we have had to endure some very tough times. And I'm representing the People's Progressive Party Civic here, but I'm being very frank about our own reality. When you look at the People's National Congress, that is the largest party in the coalition government, they have been very, 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 very harmful to Guyana's development. And that is because they've always practiced ethnopolitics by exclusion. They've always used political policies that were very extractive. They've excluded the participation of the citizens. They've created an environment that was so hostile that it was difficult for us to progress. And we've seen what happened to our society over the 28 years when they ruled. When we got into power in 1992, we began to transform this economy. We moved this economy from a HIPIC economy to a middle-income economy by the time we left office in 2015. We left close to $1 billion in the Treasury. We had thriving sectors. Our extractive sectors were thriving. We had well-organized infrastructural plans. We were doing well for the people. And in every democracy, people may want change sometimes. Many persons felt that we may not have had enough more to give, and they decided to give the APNU-AFC a chance. And what have they done with it? They went right back to their old business model. They went right back to the policies of burnout. They went right back to party paramountcy. And that is what they did to Guyana. They divided Guyana once again along party lines. And if you would have listened to some of the utterances coming out of the APNU-AFC camp, Ola Lawrence herself, the party chairman, said that she's only concerned with giving jobs to persons who are in the PNC. These are things that we are concerned about. And we have to understand that we have to have a democracy where all of the political parties believe in democracy, not only by saying it, but by displaying it in their actions. We have to have political parties that believe in the rule of law, human rights, good governance, transparency, accountability. We are not all on the same page. When you look at the record of the PNC between 1968 and 1992, no accountability, no transparency, poor governance. All the sectors were deteriorated. When you look at what they would have done when they took office in 2015, exactly the same thing. No accountability, no transparency. Audit accounts. They were not responsible for their spending. They were living lavishly, increasing their salaries, increasing their dietary, their per diem. They went about just spending the money that we left in the treasury without any accountability because of their undemocratic stance. It creates a problem for development because on the one hand you have the People's Progressive Party, Civic, in opposition, pushing for good governance, pushing for accountability, pushing for transparency, and they're pushing back because they have the wheels of power. It is difficult for us to achieve success like that. And that is why at the March 2nd polls, that is why we were returned to power. And this is not a race thing. If you look at our manifesto to our president-elect, then presidential candidate, he spoke extensively on inclusive governance, going as far as to have established a youth parliament. These are initiatives that we're going to do almost immediately. We will have an inclusive approach, even reaching across the divide, to bring persons who are like-minded on board, because democracy has to be in the veins of each and every Guyanese, including the political parties. There is only one political party in Guyana that is a champion for democracy, that has held power, and that is the People's Progressive Party, Civic. And it's unfortunate that we have the PNC-led coalition government that has a major stake within the electorate that is behaving like that. And that has caused us a lot of harm in terms of our development and in terms of creating prosperity for our people. And we cannot continue like this. We are not looking good in the eyes of CARICOM. We are one of the major economies in CARICOM. We've benefited from CARICOM. And look at what we have been brought to. Look at our country image. Look at our brand as a nation.
But Mr. Todd, let me just interrupt you there, because I do appreciate what you're saying in terms of your contrast between your political opponents and your party. But what I was trying to get at is to find out or to understand. I mean, your impending victory is going to leave quite a lot of people feeling disappointed, feeling angry, and I'm not talking about political figures in APNU-AFC. I'm talking about everyday Guyanese who may have voted for a continuation of the APNU-AFC government, who have been, listening to the rhetoric in the public square, talking about how the CCJ did not have jurisdiction to hear the case, talking about, how, Low and Field may have been justified. So I'm thinking about these people following the CCJ decision, who are feeling disappointed, who are feeling angry, who are feeling that they are at risk, perhaps, of being left aside by a new government that doesn't share their political ideology. How is the PPPC going to reach out to these people and to it's a very esoteric question, I guess, but I do understand that there is a lot of division in the society, and I'm just thinking about what can the PPPC do to try and make that division less or bring people together.
Jenica, the position, if I may give an attempt to give you the answer. Firstly, the PPPC is not going to govern for only the people who voted for them. They have said it publicly and they have said it frequently. They are going to govern for all of Guyana. So it's going to be inclusive. You said that the first time that you have come about or you came to notice what was happening in Guyana was when the no confidence motion happened in 2018. Now, in December 2018, when we had that no confidence motion, the government fell and elections should have been held 3 months after that date. Now, we had the very embarrassing, funny, I don't know what would be the correct adjective, but we went all the way to the Caribbean Court of Justice because the government contended that 33 out of 65 was not a majority. Now, every 5-year-old child knows that. It was preposterous. That angered people, that you really are coming up with nonsense, childish nonsense to fool us. And a lot of people took sides when that was happening because it simply wasn't right when they did that. Now, we had to go all the way to the Caribbean Court of Justice. While that was happening, the government took the view that we are entitled to remain in power while this really ridiculous notion is ventilated through the court system all the way to the Caribbean Court of Justice. Now, bearing in mind that the law and the Constitution provided that upon a no confidence motion happening, we should have had an election within 3 months. Now, there was no issue about whether we had a list, which is usually the problem in Guyana, because 3 weeks before that no confidence motion, we had just had the local government elections, which is the same list that is used. So, and that list was valid until April because the lists are valid for periods of 6 months.
Okay.
So the government could have done the right thing. They could have obeyed the law. They could have honored the wishes of what had happened in Parliament, and they could have gone to an election and take their chances. Now, we are 4 months beyond the date of election, which they have lost and they wouldn't leave. That again raises the ire of people. People get angry. Now, between that no confidence motion and today, I can tell you that the childish propositions are ridiculous. Firstly, yesterday, for example, I am embarrassed to say this as a Guyanese citizen, but 3 of the commissioners who are for the government side said that they needed an adjournment for a further day because they needed a hard copy of the CCJ's judgment. Now, it wasn't okay for them to read it online or on a computer screen like the whole planet did. They wanted a hard copy. They couldn't find someone with a printer. I mean, quite frankly, if they called...
I'm trying not to laugh.
Danica, if they had called you, I know you would have happily printed it for them.
I could have
if
sent
they called myself or Mr. Todd, I would have made sure
I'm really
that
trying not to laugh because I find
my
it
office
quite
took
absurd.
it as priority 1 to give them printed copies. But they didn't do that. They waited until they got to the scheduled commission meeting and say, well, we're not creating a problem here, but we would like to have a hard copy. Now, 3 commissioners are saying to us that they need that. This is the same organization that pays a lobbyist $96 million to lobby on their behalf in the United States. But they couldn't find a printer and they couldn't get a hard copy. So an entire nation waits so that they can study the judgment. Study what judgment? The whole world has read it twice. But those are the things, Janica, that angers people, that brings this divide that you speak of, where even the persons in the media are fed up with how childish it is. If I told you, and this is true, during the counting of the tabulation of the votes, when Mr. Mingo was doing it, the court ordered him to display the statement of polls by a projector. He left the building, which is 3 buildings away from my office here, and he went up to where the Elections Commission headquarters is. He put literally a sheet, a white cloth against a wall, in the open outdoors and put the projector pointed at it. At 4 p.m. in the afternoon, they were projecting onto that white screen the statement of polls for each polling station, with the sun that sets over in that direction behind them. Now, I know that I'm an old man and I need glasses to see better, but Superman could not read what was being projected onto a white sheet with the sun behind you. Now, those childish things are so foolish that people get angry. And people get more and more angry when what they perceive you to be doing is you take, in Guyana, as we say, you take your eyes and you pass them. But basically, you have no respect for them or their intellect. And that fuels the divide that has been going on since the no confidence motion. After the no confidence motion, the court said that you should have your elections within 3 months. That didn't happen. 3 months would have been September of last year. We didn't have elections until March of this year. And this is July and we don't have a result. And these objections and these foolish propositions and obstacles keep coming up. One of the persons who were previously Mr. Gaskin, Dominic Gaskin, who was previously in the government, but he has spoken out now. He says they're not going to leave until they are satisfied. That's what it seems to him. But how is it that you have to be satisfied as the incumbent that you've lost the election? Everyone has declared it. And then you have all the prime ministers, CARICOM, the OAS, the ABCE countries, everyone, the Commonwealth is saying this. They're not saying this because they don't like you. They're saying it because what the government is doing is wrong. Now, today, when we have to wait on another step in the process, the CEO is quite possibly going to do something equally childish to delay the process. This is what raises the ire. Why under the PPP this is not going to continue is because there is no intention that the PPP has to deceive people, to fool them, to have no regard for their intellect or common sense. It is to be inclusive. It is to involve the people in the government and to involve them in the process and processes that are necessary for a country to run. Now, there are going to be people who are not happy because they might have voted for the government. But the PPP supporters lived with that in 2015. And what the PPP did, they took it upon themselves under the leadership of the General Secretary, Dr. Jagdeo, and they started campaigning from a month after the election. They started to plan for the next election. But you got to understand, you cannot keep insulting people's intelligence. You cannot make childish excuses as to why you are not doing things. And you expect people not get angry after a while. People want to move on. We have a COVID epidemic on in the world. It's a pandemic. Guyana, the numbers are rising. The positive tests are rising. People are worried. You need a government in place to be able to deal with this. Do you know of all the countries on the planet that have asked the World Bank and the IMF for financial assistance to be able to deal with the pandemic? Guyana's application has not been, well, we don't know if it's approved or not, but it's certainly not been granted. Understood. We need to put this behind us so that we could get on with the process of governing and we can look after our people.
Speaking of governing, gentlemen, let us talk now about something that I think is hanging over the whole electoral process, all of the delays that have been seen, and that is the extractive industry and the major offshore deposits that were discovered just prior to this whole thing kicking off. And I mean, from to us on the outside, I think you can forgive us for thinking that part of the whole contention over the election and what was going on is because of this quite lucrative, opportunity for the country. So now that the PPPC is looking towards being in office, by the way, gentlemen, I never like to hear politicians talk about being in power. You are in office for a short space of time. The power always resides in the people. So that's just my little pet peeve right there. But just looking at a PPPC term in office, talk to me about the management of this huge opportunity. How is this party going to ensure that benefits are equitably distributed among the population and that the downsides are mitigated? Because we have seen over and over again, I mean, Exxon Valdez disaster and many others, the economic downsides are great. So talk to me about the plans of the party for managing this.
Danica, if I could take the first crack at your question.
Sure, but
Now,
I just want Mr. Todd to know that he's not off the hook because he can't sit back and relax on this one. I'm going to come to him after, but we'll start with you.
But Danica, the first thing is, the bar has been set so low by this government that it's not much that it will take to outdo them. But we intend to do much more than that. And let me explain to you what I mean. We have a Petroleum Exploration Act that was passed more than 30 years ago. 2015, upon the discovery, it was expected we would have legislation updated in place to be able to handle the industry. That has not happened. We have no regulations. We have no local content policy. That has been approved and in place. We have no local content mechanism. We have no oversight of what is going on. We have no environmental protection support to what is going on. The Environmental Protection Agency exists. It does not have the personnel. We have signed a contract that I cannot say on your station what I really feel about that contract. But I will tell you this. There was a signing bonus attached to that contract, and Mr. LeBron James got a larger signing bonus when he went to play with the Los Angeles Lakers from Cleveland. That's where the signing bonus of our natural resources were. That signing bonus was also not declared to the people. More than a year of agitation in the public, in the press, it took for that signing bonus to be known. We still haven't had the signing bonus being put into our consolidated fund. Lord knows where it is. But we have also not implemented a tax regime that would be helpful or that would be to the benefit of the people of Guyana. We have done nothing to support or give incentive to businesses or local industries that want to participate in the petroleum sector so that they can build capacity, so that they can improve, so that they can get the necessary ISO certifications, so that they can actually meaningfully participate. We have done nothing to do that. We have not even provided a mechanism for what happens if, as you said, there is an Exxon Valdez. God forbid, if that were to ever happen here, we have to foot the bill. We have no arrangements in place. The other thing that we need to understand is this. Exxon's contract with Guyana, which this government went and signed, allows Exxon, in terms of capital expenditures, to recover all of it. So unfortunately, whatever is a cost for Exxon to be in Guyana and do business, the Guyanese people will pay. We pay for the flights, we pay for the schooling, we pay for the travel, we pay for all the whatever the employees. These are things, all of the services provided and utilized by the company. Now, that contract is a production sharing agreement, the model of which has not been signed anywhere on God's green earth since 1986. No one signs a contract in that manner anymore. I am lucky in that I've been to institutions in the UK and Scotland about oil and gas, and I've been working in the sector since about 2004. The model that we have used is so outdated, and we have what is called a stabilization clause, which means if we were to pass laws in our parliament or to change the tax regime in our country, and that's to the disadvantage of Exxon, we have to pay them whatever difference it is that they have lost. It's called the stabilization clause. We're not allowed to change our laws to our benefit anymore. The contracts were so lopsided. Now, I want you to be clear.
So just very, very quickly, is there any thought among your colleagues in the PPPC that there's an opportunity to renegotiate these contracts, make any adjustments? Well, how are you going to?
Grown men sign these contracts, and grown men might be a generous description for what they are, but they signed on behalf of our country, and we simply cannot break contracts. That would be inimical to our interests and detrimental to our industry. What we have to do is, as you correctly say, we have to sit down with the various producers, and we have to renegotiate those arrangements, and we have to do our best to get more and a better deal for the people. Now, it's not all doom and gloom, because there are other arrangements that can be put in place. There are other contracts to be negotiated. There is a block or at least two blocks that have to be awarded. We can have better arrangements with that. There are definitely ways that we can, by consent, work with the companies, the oil companies that are here, and make ourselves a little bit more better for our people. But what has to happen when we do that is we should not forget gold, which has been keeping us afloat for so long. We have to make sure that we look after that industry. Our agricultural sector, we need to put our resources to making that sector more profitable than what it is, because those are the sectors that have kept Guyana alive all this time. And we shouldn't forget it. That would be walking straight into the Dutch curse. But in terms of what we need to do, Janica, we need to actually build from the ground up. It is embarrassing that after 5 years, we have done absolutely nothing, except we have signed contracts. We have given lift contracts at comparatively to what the world rates are, very low. We are trying to give another contract. There are bids out. We have no oversight of Parliament. We have even no oversight of a minister, in theory, but these things are going on. So hopefully this is resolved so that when the PPPC government is in office, they can address from the ground up the entire process. They have said on the campaign trail, and they have said in their manifesto, that they are committed to using lawful means and obtain the best possible arrangements that can be done. They intend to put in place mechanisms such as laws, regulations that would be to the benefit of the local industry and the people of Guyana. So there's a lot to be done, and it's not getting done when we're waiting on a man to go do a report while the other one wants to consider a hard copy of a judgment. These are not things that are conducive to the national interest.
And Mr. Todd, can you just weigh in on that in terms of managing the oil sector? And I want to throw in an extra bit for consideration here. When the region learned about the discovery of the first, the second, and then it seemed like there's a lot of offshore oil to be gotten, people were concerned from an environmental standpoint. Now, strict environmentalists would tell you that the best place for oil and gas is in the ground where it is, right? And we as a planet should really not be looking to do new extractions of these resources. We should actually be looking to transition our economies, transition ourselves away from this dependence on fossil fuel. So, I mean, just square with me the idea of nominally forward-thinking, forward-looking, progressive government that you say the PPPC will bring, going back to the extractive industries, going back to the fossil fuel industries to actually develop new sites, new wells, new infrastructure. I mean, I don't want to ask you if you think Guyana needs it, but does Guyana, need it? Is there no way to execute your developmental goals without depending on this extractive industry?
Well, thank you, Jenny. Let me begin by saying, first, to correct the narrative coming out of the APNU-AFC. The first agreement for oil was signed under the People's Progressive Party civic when we were in government here back in 1999. But if you look at our developmental policies over the last 23 years, between 1992 and 2015, you would have seen that we have done very well sources that we've had all along. What happened when this government came in 2015 is that they shifted all of the focus on just oil, and they were focusing on development, leaving all of the other sectors behind, and that is why the other sectors, extractive industries, have slumped between 2015 to date, because they have excluded those from the developmental framework and they only focused on oil. Now, let's be real. Oil is a finite resource, and if you look at our involvement in oil, the multinationals are the ones who are taking control of it, right? Now, we have already said that we're going to revise or revisit some of the agreements to ensure that the people of Guyana benefit. And then we also have to avoid the resource curse at the same time. But more importantly, we have spent most of our time during the campaign and even before the campaigning began focusing on our current sectors. As Sanjeev, agriculture is one of our major sectors. We have to focus on that. We have to focus on tourism. We have to focus on gold, bauxite, other mining. We have to focus on infrastructure development. So oil for us is really to push our diversification and value added and work tirelessly to ensure that we have an inclusive approach to ensure that we can achieve what we set out in our manifesto. The other thing that is important too, and if you would have gotten a chance to listen to our General Secretary over the years in his press conferences and most of his engagements with the press, he would always allude to the fact that he's going to remove politics from oil. We are going to have a framework, and I think Sanjeev alluded to most of the framework, where we will not have political interference. And for that to work, we have to have a sovereign wealth fund that is far removed from politicians. That is important for us because that will be backed up with a solid local content arrangement where we can also participate and our citizens can benefit. But more importantly, when we look at development as a whole, Guyana is still a developing economy. We're still way behind the rest of the economies in this hemisphere. I mean, if you look at it, we're what? We're the second poorest still. So if you're looking at development, I don't think you can go green before before dealing with some fossil fuels and using fossil fuels to enhance your development. But if you look at the Western world and Western civilization, they have been able to achieve rapid development through human activity and the use of fossil fuels. So I don't think that we should leave the oil in the ground. I disagree with that, but it's how we manage it, and we have to ensure that we have a policy framework where we still give attention to the environment. And I'm not sure if you're aware, but we were able to develop a fantastic environmental framework, our low carbon development strategy, which was worked on the Dr. Barjaville, who's now a general secretary, which we will also use and give some more thought to bring it up to speed with the reality in terms of development. So we're going to have a developmental framework that includes protection of the environment, sustainable management of our extractive industries, and we will ensure that we have a policy framework that we will benefit from the oil, from fossil fuels, to ensure that we can provide for people, because we have to be real with ourselves. We have a lot of infrastructural work to do. If you look at how Guyana is configured, we have a lot of waterways, we have a lot of space for road networks, and we can only develop if we focus heavily on infrastructure development. So we have to move ahead. I mean, I respect environmentalists and what they have to say, but I don't think the Western world is paying the developing world enough to leave the oil in the ground. I think we need to exploit it. Exxon is here. We have other companies that are here, but we have to manage it in such a way that we do not destroy the environment at the same time. And we're competent enough to do that. We have a lot of experts on board, and I'm sure we have also we can actually get on board to assist us. So moving forward, I don't think we have a problem with environmental protection. We've always had sound environmental practices with our low carbon development strategy, which we benefited immensely from, is the Guyana agreement. And we have already demonstrated to the Guyana and to the Caribbean and the rest of the world that we are good for business, and at the same time we have good policies to manage in a sustainable manner.
That is a good point about
Jenica,
sure, go ahead.
Just to add a small thing to what Brother Todd was saying. The thing is, Jenica, this. Guyana has still much of its rainforest. We are carbon positive in a great way. Now, we are one of the few countries on the planet, one of only 3, and we are certainly the one at the top of that list, that with a natural resource like oil, we have Irokrama, which is a rainforest project, and we have most of our rainforest intact at the moment. So what we are doing by the oil production and what will be envisaged with the oil production in the event of the net effect on the planet, which is calculated by a system of carbon credits, we would certainly be in a much better position. I will admit to you that in recent times, because of, at present, Exxon is flaring, and there is a bit of controversy about that and how long should it continue.
Right.
But that's not the point. If it were working and if their equipment was working as it should, we are still carbon positive in what we're doing because we have such of our so much of our
indigenous rainforest, right? Thank you for that point. Yes, I actually did not include that in my assessment of the situation. So I think what you have raised is actually quite interesting. Mr. Todd, you had said that the developed countries are not doing enough, because there is that discussion about transfer payments to developing countries to pay them to keep the oil in the ground. So I do think that is an assessment that needs to be taken into consideration, as well as the preservation of large swaths of rainforest to ensure that Guyana is still, on the right side of the carbon balance sheet. So what I want to talk about next is you said that your intention, or your party's intention, was to keep the politics out of the oil. That is a very noble and ambitious goal. We will keep an eye to see how well you accomplish that.
It is achievable.
But something that I want to talk about, and we're scheduled for a break, so we'll do that on the other side of these messages, is your General Secretary, his history in politics, and how the party can chart a new way forward with him in position. So, we're going to talk about how you navigate that role, because there's a lot of discussion out there about, how autonomous or independent is Mr. Ali really going to be when there is this, elder statesman kind of hanging out there in the party. So we'll discuss that, but first we'll take a quick break, very quick break, I'm being told, because everybody is really keyed into this discussion. So I just wanted to let you know that we have a number of people on our live feed, and I'm sure your broadcast is also attracting a lot of attention. So we don't want to kill the momentum too much. We'll take a quick break. We'll come back with more discussion on the other side. Stay with us. Choice News Now, live at midday. We'll be right back.
We have a situation on our hands, and it's called the coronavirus.
To help stop the spread of this virus,
good hygiene is essential.
So be responsible.
Wash your hands often with soap and water for at least 20 seconds.
Especially when you cough, sneeze, or blow your nose.
Cough or sneeze in your arm or tissue, and dispose responsibly.
Avoid touching your face.
Have as little contact between you and other people.
If you develop symptoms, seek medical advice.
And stay home away from people until full recovery.
Remember those prone to viruses?
It's like older adults and people who have serious underlying medical conditions.
Be informed.
Know that the virus spreads mainly through close contact with an infected person through coughing or sneezing.
Know the symptoms: fever, cough, and shortness of breath.
Stop the spread. Keep St. Lucia healthy.
Call 311 for the latest information.
Welcome back. Thanks for sticking with us through our very short break, because we definitely wanted to jump right back into the discussion. We have Mr. Todd and Mr. Datadin. They are both candidates for the People's Progressive Party Civic. Before we go back to talking about what we discussed, I just want to take a quick detour into the provenance of your party's name. Tell me, because this is something that I didn't have a chance to research before I started talking to you. So just briefly tell me where this name came from. Why are you the People's Progressive Party Civic? What's that about?
If I could take it's really a short story. The People's Progressive Party is the oldest political party in Guyana. In fact, it started as a committee, and the two main members were Mr. Chelly Jagan and Mr. Forbes Burnham. In the 1950s, when political ideologies were East and West, communist, capitalist, and those things, the party separated. Mr. Burnham formed the People's National Congress, and Chelly Jagan continued as leader of the People's Progressive Party. In 1990, there were a number of parties clamoring. We had continuously rigged elections all through the 60s, 70s, 80s under Mr. Burnham. And in 1990, there was a movement of a lot of persons who were not politicians, not members of political parties, but they were agitating to have free and fair elections and the return to democracy in Guyana. As a result, they were they were a group of civic persons, not as opposed to being political.
I see.
And in 1992, there was an agreement between the People's Progressive Party and the group of persons calling themselves civic. And what happens is the People's Progressive Party would be the presidential candidate, and one from not within the party or a civic member would be the prime ministerial candidate, which in Guyana, the president is number one, the executive, and his deputy. So it's almost like a president and a vice president.
Sure.
You could think of it that way, but we call our vice president the prime minister.
Prime Minister. Understood.
So that's how the name came about.
That's actually a very interesting history.
And that's how it's been. It's still the oldest party in Guyana.
That is a very, very interesting history. Thank you very much for that lesson. What I want to talk about now, this is something that I think is quite fascinating to us here in St. Lucia, because we also are having to look at a political party with a new leader, but the previous leader is still existing within the party structure. Now, with People's Progressive Party Civic, Bharat Jagdeo, who was the president of Guyana for a number of years, and who has been in various leadership positions, moving up through the party for basically his entire political career. He joined at the age of 16. He now sits as the general secretary of the party. What I have been hearing from people is a concern that his influence over the party is still paramount, so to speak, and that a PPPC government would be a Bharat Jagdeo government, despite the fact that he does not necessarily occupy an elected position. So I don't know what I don't have a particular question to ask about that, but it's just something that has been articulated to me by several different people that I've spoken to, and I thought that it was an interesting consideration. So how does that party structure work internally? I'm not expecting you to repudiate Mr. Jagdeo, but just how does Mr. Ali and his running mate, how do they do their work without the sense from the electorate that there is that presence of Mr. Jagdeo, directing their hands?
That's, look at it this way. There is a party structure of which Dr. Jagdeo, as the general secretary, is in fact the pinnacle of the party. And then there is the political structure. Now, as it stands, Dr. Irfan Ali is the president-elect. He's the presidential candidate, and with him is Brigadier retired Phillips, who will be the prime minister. Now, there is no secret, and I don't think there is any surprise, that in the new government, Dr. Jagdeo will be a member of that government. He will be one of the elected members that possibly take a position in parliament. He may not. But there is nothing to be fearful of, because you have to understand that Dr. Ali is the presidential candidate and he will be the president, which means he will be the executive president. Is he going to consult, or is he going to have conversations with Dr. Jagdeo? I would be very surprised if he didn't. In fact, if I had a say in what to suggest to him, I would suggest that he does take some advice, because that's how the world works. You have persons who would have done things before, and they would guide and they will offer advice. Now, I think that is true for every leader. You take advice from persons you have trust in. I know the relationship between Dr. Ali and Dr. Jagdeo, from what I have seen, and for what I have witnessed, is a very good one. It's a positive relationship. Now, does that mean that if you take advice and if you seek advice and suggestions, if Dr. Ali does that from Dr. Jagdeo, that it's a problem? Why would it be a problem? I think what people are trying to imply is that it's really going to be Dr. Jagdeo's decision. Well, there's nothing that I have seen in the interactions between the two gentlemen that would lead me to believe so. I think that it's a healthy relationship. You seek advice, you have a discussion, you work out on what the way forward is and what's the best thing to do in the circumstances. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. Every leader has advisors. Every leader has some advisors are more, I don't want to say influential, but more trusted. In fact, they're consulted a lot more than other advisors are. But that's the situation that this is. There is no, what should I say? There is no secret that Dr. Jagdeo will be, and he has said publicly, that he is going to be involved in the government under Dr. Ali. There is no secret about that. And why should there be? The fact that he has gained over the 12 years as president and several other years as a minister of finance, he's gained so much knowledge and experience in how to run a country, how to do things, how to achieve targets. Why would you discard that? There is no need for that to be discarded. If you look around the region, and if you look, except for the United States, where they would have persons in the UK, for example, who have been former prime ministers, and they sit in the Houses of Parliament still. They still offer advice to whoever the prime minister is, and they still offer advice to the government of the day. That's what should happen. Elders giving you advice in experience and sharing their experience with what they have done, seen, achieved, is a positive. It shouldn't be taken to be as a negative at all.
Point well taken. Mr. Todd, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, I just to add that both men are professionals. I would say that Dr. Jagdeo has youth on his side. He became president in his early 30s, in his 50s. So one can only imagine in a small developing economy like Guyana, you would need all of the talent that you have. He's still an asset. He remains an asset. And I think he will be moving forward. But if you look on the other hand at Dr. Irfan Ali, who is elect, he is an executive in the party. He has been a senior functionary in government. He has a fantastic track record in the infrastructure development of he has his ideas, he has his policies, he has his plans, he has programs. He will be the leader of the cabinet, and he will be his own man. I would venture to have, in my view, a very good relationship. I think he will respect Dr. Jagdeo as his senior, and Dr. Jagdeo will respect him as the president. And I think it would work quite well. It has worked well in opposition for us, and that is why we have been elected. And I think they will do fantastic as comrades in the new government.
Closing on 2 o'clock, the cutoff point for this discussion. Let me just ask you to now look forward to, I know this is usually an artificial timeline that the press loves to hang on, and it doesn't really mean anything for governance, but please just indulge me in this, and let's look at the first 100 days. So three plus months down the line, what do you expect from a PPPC government? What early initial actions do you think can be accomplished in that short initial time frame? Let's start with you, Mr. Todd.
We go back to our manifesto. We want to move swiftly by reversing those action measures. There are 200 essential items that was added to. We're going to remove that. Unfortunately, we have a pandemic upon us, and we will have to be able to grapple with that. It's a public health crisis. We don't know the full extent of it because we're not in government, but for what we've been doing so far, the signs are troubling. So that is something that we have to deal with. So we have to deal with health, which is important, because without health, you don't have an economy. So we'll have to balance that with being able to reintegrate people back into society, and we'll have to face this. I believe that we have a lot of our measures that we can actually implement going forward. We still have to look at the finances in the government, because we have to give relief. We've already introduced our social and economic and financial relief measures. We've already given a framework and a budget to be able to give relief to our citizens in the critical sectors. So I believe in the first 300 days, that should be the priority for us, trying to balance the public health crisis and getting the economy back on its feet. And then we'll be able to move into the other critical areas that we've already outlined.
Okay. And for you, Mr. Datadin, apart from, dealing with the public health crisis, which, as Mr. Todd said, is still raging over in Guyana, do you have any pet policy areas that you would like to see early action on?
Well, of course, we have to move on what's going on in the petroleum sector. We have to get laws in place as quickly as we can. We have to reform the sector. We have to find ways to incentivize and include local content. We have to get our own people to be able to benefit. We have to consider a regime of taxes as an advantage of being in the local market, being from the local market. We have to consider all of these things, and we have to do it quickly. We have to reform our courts. We certainly have to make changes. There is a lot of constitutional reform that needs to take place. There is short, medium, long term. Clearly, the current process of which is going on with what GCOM happened with GCOM and the use of the law in a most perverse way, and there being not enough sanction to stop persons who will take these breaches of law to such an extent. We've got to look at those. We've got to look at why our judges have been doing or have been making decisions which are problematic. And we have to always wait until we get to the Caribbean Court of Justice to have a clear distillation of the principles and what we are doing. We can't certainly have a court that thinks that 35 is not the majority of 66, which incidentally is what the Guyana Court of Appeal did. It's an embarrassing thing, but we got to find reasons as to why these things are happening. I am not saying that what we need to do is to interfere with the judicial system, far from. We need to support it. We need to implement a system which will work for the benefit of the people, and it will not prove to be so expensive and so lengthy that you have to go through 3 courts, always to the apex court before you have a resolution that is deemed or seen to be fair and independent. But there is much to be done in terms of the law enforcement, in terms of the court system, in terms of the petroleum sector. There are things that we need to do in the short and medium term, and those are going to be achieved.
Well, thank you so much for your time today, gentlemen. I had a very illuminating discussion with both of you, Hugh Todd and Sanjeev Datadin of the People's Progressive Party Civic over in Guyana. It is now 2 o'clock. And so I personally am going to be going over to Guyana news outlets and hitting F5 on my browser to see when that report and that decision has come in. I know that both of you are probably going to do the same thing. And, good luck. Good luck to you both.
I can tell you as of 4 minutes ago, the answer is no. So. We'll see what happens.
So we're still waiting. That's what you're saying.
We're still waiting.
We're still
That's
waiting.
that.
Great. We haven't missed it. That's all the time that we have. So I just want to thank you once again for joining me, and thank you to all of the viewers who tuned in for today's episode of our live news program. As always, everybody is welcome to tune in at 8 p.m. tonight for Choice TV's primetime broadcast, and you can catch me again on Monday, same time, for another edition of the live midday newscast. Until then, I'm Janika Simon saying goodbye.